Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you, everyone, to today's webinar, What to Do When You're Being Interpreted. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are right now. It's 4 p.m. here in Brussels. It's a sunny day, but I'm still glad that you all can join in, no matter how good or bad the weather is in your location. And yeah, I'm glad you could make it. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Alexander Drechsel. I'm a staff interpreter at an international organization here in Brussels, but I'm participating in this webinar in a purely private capacity, so I'm not speaking for my employer, so just to get that out of the way. And I have two esteemed colleagues with me today. First of all, I have Mariana Hernandez. She's a freelance conference interpreter and a translator working with English, French, and Spanish. She has a lot of experience in working with international NGOs, with United Nations agencies and companies from the private and the public sector. She also blogs about interpretation and translation on her website. You may have seen that, or you can, of course, check it out later on. And then we have with us Peter van den Steene. He's also an interpreter, a very experienced interpreter. He's based out of Luxembourg, where he's the owner of Presence Group. He's not only an interpreter, he's also a speaker, a communications expert, a strategist, and a philosopher, but also a cosmopolitan, as he likes to say. He will give us a little bit of an agency perspective on the whole topic later on. And of course, I'd be remiss not to thank our host, VoiceBoxer, particularly Sergio Llorian, the CEO of VoiceBoxer. Thank you very much for having us today. And of course, for the participants, I would like to say what's coming up in this webinar. So the big thing I wanted to get out of the way, first of all, is that interpreters are your allies. The interpreter is your ally, because of course we know that meetings, events, conferences, presentations, whatever you're organizing, it's always very stressful. There's a lot of things that you have to talk about, and you don't want interpretation to be a problem. You want interpretation to be something that enriches your event, that powers your event, makes it successful. And interpreters are there to help you achieve that, because we know as well that you have a lot of plates spinning at the same time. So we're trying to help you make your event, be it a remote event, an online event, or a real-life event. We want to make sure that it's a success for you, and we want to make it a success for your participants as well, because we know that you, as the expert, you want to focus on the communication, you want to focus on the subject matter at hand, and you don't want to have to worry about interpretation too much, because maybe you're a little bit nervous as well. Maybe it's the first time you do public speaking, or maybe you have a difficult presentation to give, something that is high stakes. We know that, so we're trying to help you. So I think the first key takeaway is really that we are your ally, and that you should certainly think about interpreting during preparation. So when you know that there's a multilingual event coming up, you get the right interpreter, somebody who can really help you, and then they will help to ensure that the event is successful. Because we have a shared objective, which is to have a successful meeting, successful communication, and to help participants get the most out of the event. And a good thing to bear in mind, I think, is that interpreters often react the same way that delegates or participants do. So if the interpreters don't quite get something, it's very likely that the delegates may miss out on something as well. So that's something to bear in mind as well. We are going to talk a little bit about all those do's and don'ts a little bit later on. We will talk a little bit about speaking style, what to bear in mind to make it a good event for your audience, and to get your message across. And if we have time, we'll also try to talk a little bit about remote interpretation, online events, and the differences that that may have. Okay. But first of all, I would like to pass the floor on to Mariana. She will be speaking about the interpreter's perspective. Then after that, we will have Peter van den Steene talk a little bit about the agency perspective as well. Then we'll bring that all together. I will do a little bit of a wrap-up. I'll give the key points again, and then maybe we can discuss a few things. And of course, you, as the audience, you will also have the opportunity to ask questions, to talk about things that you would like to see addressed during this session. So now I would like to hand over the floor to Mariana Hernandez.
Thank you, Alex, for the kind introduction, and thank you, VoiceBoxer, for inviting me. Thanks to everybody who joined us today. And well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I am personally located in Budapest, still in a beautiful, beautiful summer day. And well, it's an interesting thing for an interpreter to become the presenter. It's quite a different perspective on things. So I hope I will be everything that I'm advising presenters to be. And since I am of the opinion that an image tells 1,000 words, although I might say much more than 1,000 words right now, I still thought it would be nice to simply illustrate them. And I prepared a presentation of pictures. So maybe we can see the first one. And I don't know how to do this. I hope this is it. Okay, so I hope you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. What I want to say is that communications are never easy. I mean, even when people speak the same language, even when they know each other very well, like let's say a family, spouses, best friends, misunderstandings still happen. So of course, when different languages are involved, communications can look a little bit like this picture. As you can see here, it's not really clear which line leads where. And well, our job as interpreters is actually to make sure that communications run smoothly, that every message makes sense, that everyone understands what is being said and is able to follow the conversation and stay on the right track. However, for this to happen, interpreters need your help. We can't do it on our own. And what kind of help do we need from you? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is for you to send us the material to prepare for the event well in advance. In the worst case scenario, we receive nothing, except maybe the title of the event, if we're lucky. Sometimes we receive links to websites or even whole books. But even if that's helpful, we're still like the penguins on this image. I think we can think that these are two interpreters and maybe the technical guide helping them who's on their side. But they're isolated from the speaker, not really knowing what is going to happen or how to be more useful. And in order to be successful, we need to understand that we are all in this together. If the presenter wishes to spend his time well, he or she has prepared very carefully what will be discussed, and sometimes even anecdotes and jokes to go with it, to connect with the audience. And if this is not communicated clearly to the interpreter ahead of time, it's all useless. So much work and preparation means nothing because the interpreter is not really to perform his task. Let me share a personal story. I once had a client. We had a very long relationship in spite of what I'm going to tell you right now. He was working in marketing, and once he decided to organize this team building event and brought his team to a paintball place. And I was interpreting consecutively. I was standing next to him, ready to launch the event. It was a very noisy place. And then we were standing in front of an army of marketers who were all ready to go into paintball battle. And things were going pretty well. Until, out of nowhere, the presenter decided to crack a joke about Iraq. Those were actually the early times of the war. And in retrospect, I must admit, it was a very funny joke, except at the time I didn't get it. I understood Iraq when he said Iraq. And well, that was the punchline. So there were not too many laughters in the audience, and he was not pleased. Well, this could have turned out very differently if I had heard the joke in advance. If I had been briefed, I could have actually used my intonation to let the audience know that a joke was coming up. And I could have found a way of transmitting the humor and elicit a few laughters from the crowd. But that's not what happened. Actually, my client was mortified. And in fact, I think I felt much worse. In these cases, it's very easy to blame the interpreter. But the fact is, the interpreter, in this case me, was left all alone, isolated in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean of information, much like the penguins on this image. So what to do? Well, I cannot stress enough the importance of working together. You have to think of your interpreter as an extension of yourself. We are not there as individuals that say, we are there only to assist you, to make sure that the hard work that you have put into developing a message actually gets through to a larger audience. The best thing that can happen is that both you and the audience forget we're even there. And this only will happen if we work together from the beginning. So how do we do that? How do we collaborate together to have a successful event? Well, first of all, we need to know what you're going to talk about. This is the basics. And let me clarify. I mean, it's very nice if you send us links to articles or whole books or reports, but it's not enough. It may look like cooperation, but it's not. Too much information is the same as no information. I once received a 36 pages report, and in the end, it was not even mentioned once in the whole presentation. So all the time I took reading the report and preparing the terminology was not very useful. So what to send us? Well, if you have prepared specific data that you wish to share with your audience, please share it with us. This is especially true for figures, because it's hard to remember numbers, percentages, dates we are not familiar with, while we are also rendering your message in a different language. So if you go through all the trouble of preparing these figures, please do send them to us. We'll put them to good use. Timing is also important, because we are like you, we are all busy professionals. And although we generally specialize in some topics and have good knowledge about those topics, we basically juggle events and conferences, and we must be prepared for all of them. I have an excellent example of another customer who is really top of the line. He generally sends the information well ahead of time. I mean, let's say a month or two even before the event. Then he will hold a meeting between all the presenters and all the interpreters the day before the event, so that all questions can be clarified and answered. Of course, we don't need to do this every time. This is an extreme example for a very delicate and technical topic. Generally, receiving your information a couple of weeks in advance is good enough. Or if it's a very short presentation, 48 hours before the event still works. We do prefer more time. And a few specific examples of the documentation we need to have in our hands and in front of our eyes before the event are figures, like I said, but also names of foreign cities, regions, government officials, politicians, VIPs, specific companies, divisions in the company, brands, members of the board, rock stars, I mean, whoever and whatever you will speak about, especially if they are foreign names, which we probably haven't heard before. If you are in a panel of presenters, then sometimes it's the biographies of each presenter will be read, and this is also very useful if you can share this to us ahead of time in case they are read during the event. And since I mentioned reading, a very quick note. We don't like it, but if you absolutely must read something while being interpreted, please consider sharing the document with the interpreters ahead of time and telling us it will be read. We're all very happy to sign NDAs. I mean, we do it all the time. We are absolutely not in the gossip industry, journalism, or industrial espionage. We're all about delivering your message to your target audience as clearly as possible. We are on your side, remember. Please trust us. We are your best friend. And I say that we don't like when a presenter reads something, because usually then people tend to read very, very fast. And this leads me to my next idea. But of course, I understand that public speaking is stressful. I get it. Believe me, I do, especially right now. But the speed at which you speak is exceedingly important, not only for us, like Alexander said, but also for the audience in general, because if you go too fast, it's not only the interpreter who will lose track of what's being said. Take also into account the fact that you are speaking in English and we are not. We are using other languages which tend to be longer than English. I think actually English, a sentence in French is 20% longer than the exact same sentence in English, and Spanish is even longer. This means that we definitely need to fit all those extra words in there. So speed is very, very important, as is clarity. I mean, I understand that English is a native language throughout the globe. So this gives us a myriad of accents, very beautiful accents. I mean, personally, I love accents. I think they're really lovely. But this is not the case when I'm struggling to understand them. I have also noticed that some speakers have a tendency to lower their voices dramatically at the end of a sentence. And this has quite an impact on the interpretation. You know why? And I think this is very interesting. This is something that most people never think of. But actually, the sound of our own voices is very loud. And if my voice drowns the sound of your voice, well, I simply will not be able to speak and hear at the same time. So please try to speak at a level volume. Actually, this tends to happen to people who speak very quickly. Like maybe you get nervous, I don't know, and you're trying to fit so much information and you're trying to do it in a short time, and then you don't manage to finish your sentences, something like this. But if, on the other hand, if you speak at a regular pace, then your intonation tends to be much more natural, much more level. You can try it on your own and you can see the difference. A final point is that I know that in the specific case of online interpretation, it's often not possible to have microphones for everyone, for all the participants in a room. And therefore, if someone comments or makes a question but doesn't have a microphone, then I would kindly ask you to remember the conundrum of not being able to interpret what we cannot hear. And please repeat that question or that comment. That is so very helpful. And actually, I have noticed that presenters tend to speak slower when they are repeating someone's question. So if you're not sure what the right speed is, this is what you should be aiming for during your whole presentation or when answering questions. Like I said before, I understand that presenting can be very stressful and that it takes time to implement these advices in your routine for them to become second nature. But I think these recommendations can really help us work together like a team that we are supposed to be. So to finish, I just want to say that one of the goals of us interpreters is to make sure that everyone is having a good time. You're speaking about something very important for you, something you work really hard at, and a topic of which you are an expert. The audience is here to learn from you. They want to know what's going on. They are really interested in your input, and we want them to receive it. We want to give them every single word. We don't want to leave anything out. We want to make sure that what you have worked so hard to prepare is definitely received by your audience. We want everyone to have a feeling of satisfaction at the end, knowing that everything went fine and that communication was smooth and maybe even seamless. So that's all for me. I hope you found these tips useful. I know it's a lot to take in, but I assure you everybody will benefit from it, especially you, the presenters. This is what interpreters are here for ultimately. It's to make you shine. It's to make your message shine. And we would be very, very glad to make it with you. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you very much indeed, Mariana. And you may have noticed there's a bit of a thread going through what we're saying, which of course is part of the point of this whole webinar. So thank you very much, Mariana, for sharing so generously your experience. And thank you also for being so generous and talking about things that maybe didn't quite as planned or didn't go so well. Maybe that takes quite a bit of courage, I know. But rest assured, of course, that we don't share any details of our assignments. We usually share more our experience as interpreters, and today we want to do that to give you an understanding of what we do and what kind of role we play in a meeting or in a conference. You have certainly noticed as well that preparation is very, very important for us, not just for your meeting in general, but very important also for working with interpreters. So giving them the information in advance, giving them the information that they need to do a good job for the conference, for the event. And what I usually do is compare it a little bit to what journalists do, because journalists, they can write or talk about pretty much anything, but they're not really an expert in anything particular. But they really delve deeply into a topic. They do research, and then they can confidently write or talk about the topic at hand. And that's more or less what we as interpreters do, or only we do it in a multilingual context. So I think that also will give you a better understanding of what it is that we do. And of course, that kind of preparation is always easier when you have the cooperation of the other side, as it were. That makes the job easier for everyone involved. So thanks again, Mariana. And I would like to hand it over now to Peter, who will talk to us about his experience and his perspective. Over to you, Peter.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Peter. I'm calling in from Luxembourg, where, believe it or not, what weather is wonderful, the sun is also shining, but I'm sure it's a few degrees less than about anywhere else. So what to say after the more than brilliant presentation, explanation by Marianne? Well, maybe the point of view of an agency. We at the Presence Group, we are actually between the interpreters and the clients when it comes to dealing with the same problems. So our job is to listen to the interpreters and to everything that Mariana has explained, and to try, and that's the really hard part, to make the client listen to what the interpreters might require. Now, it isn't the case that the client is necessarily ill-willed. It's a matter of the client not being used to interpretation, or the client not having the time, or you're not talking to the right person at the client. So anyway, anyhow, it is kind of a battle as an agency to try to make both sides happy. And very often it is a matter of compromise sometimes. And sometimes in the worst of circumstances, you get, of course, blamed by both sides, which is an uncomfortable situation to be in. But hey, that's life, and that's also our job as an agency. So to complicate matters, it's not only the fact that clients are not interpreters, are not used to interpretation, but they are also under severe budget restraints. So there are budget cuts all the time, especially in our market. We are especially working for the private market, so that means multinational companies. So needless to say that after everything that's going on in the world and been going on, companies are putting agencies like us under pressure all the time, which doesn't do any good when it comes to making sure that the interpreter, who is also depending on us, gets the best possible working conditions. However, that's what we always try to do, because we try to make it clear to the customer that there is a paradox in the fact that the client is putting so much money, paying so much money for interpretation, and then he doesn't take it into account, and in other words, doesn't make the most of it, which is really a shame. But just imagine how difficult it is to make a client who has never, ever heard about what it is to be an interpreter, who very often has never ordered interpretation. Very often managers, they get a new assistant, and the poor girl gets bombarded with the interpreter. So they have really already a difficult time understanding that interpreters are working in pairs of two. Believe it or not, when we say that, very often they say, "What do you mean we need two Spanish interpreters? There is only one person in the audience." So we need to explain to them then that the number of people in the audience is really not a problem, that it really depends on the length of the meeting. So, and that it is this factor that determines the fact that you need two interpreters, because interpreters can't work all the time. They need to relay each other, and we have to take that into account. There is apparently, so I'm being told, a problem with my microphone. So I hand it over to Alex, because we are going to have to do a short check on this. Alex?
Yes, I'm sorry, everyone. We'll have to take a very quick break there because there was a slight problem with the mic on Peter's side. And I'll just hand it over to Sergio from VoiceBoxer.
Thank you very much, Alex. While I was listening to the presentations, from a speaker's side, I was thinking, and I guess, Mariana, this is a question for you, and Alex, I'd love to hear your opinions as well. They say fear of public speaking is one of the biggest phobias that people face. And of course, as you mentioned, the message that you're repeating is preparation, preparation, preparation. And Mariana, as you say, when people read, they also go fast. They also sound a bit robotic. So what I think is interesting is, how do we balance preparation with personality? To give you an example, I prefer to speak extemporaneously. I prefer to know the generalities of my topic and let my thoughts just come through. Of course, I still have the preparation, but specifically what I'm going to say, or the jokes, as you mentioned, Mariana, in your story, the jokes that I might tell, I won't have thought of ahead of time. So, I guess what I'm saying is, when we think about pace, what advice might you give to a speaker on how to balance preparation and pace with personality? Whoever wants to answer, I give it to you.
Okay, I'll step in just for a second, and thank you to Sergio for the question. I don't really think there's a rule of thumb or any precise rule, basically, to decide on how much you should prepare and how much you should let your personality get through. I mean, ideally, public speaking is always about letting your personality shine through, because if it were only about transferring knowledge or insight, then people could just read a book or a web article, I guess. So people are always interested in hearing you say something as a person. At least that's my belief. And I think a good rule of thumb indeed is to see communication not as a one-way street where you talk and expect everybody else to listen and nod in agreement, but that you also see what the reaction of your audience is. So are they maybe looking confused? Then you will get a clue as to what you maybe should explain again, or maybe slow down. And you can not only, as I said at the beginning, you can not only look at the audience, you can also look at the interpreters and see how they react. Do they nod? Can they work fluently? Do they get what you're saying? And just pick up these clues. I don't think it's very difficult. And one rule of public speaking anyway is to keep that eye contact. So I think that would be my tip. And I'll just hand over to Mariana for her reply now.
Thank you. What I wanted to say, I mean, you said pretty much everything, Alex. I think this was excellent. What I wanted to say also is that as interpreters, we generally are trained to go with the flow. So this means that if ever in the middle of a presentation, spontaneously a joke happens, and maybe even the presenter never really thought about it ahead of time, which is completely natural, then we can also translate, I mean, give our interpretation of the joke, and we sometimes, when we know it will not make sense in the target language, we can also tell the audience that the presenter is actually joking. This is a joke that's not really transferable, that will not necessarily be funny in this language, but it means this and this. We can do that sometimes. And of course, I think the person, the presenter, should always be as authentic as possible. And we try to do that ourselves as well. We try to follow your personality, a bit like your shadow, sort of thing, in a totally not creepy way.
Okay, I'm glad we clarified that it was meant in a not creepy way. And as Mariana said, we as interpreters like to go with the flow, and that's what we're going to do right now. And I will hand it back to Peter. Off you go.
Okay, back on. I hope this time it is not going to let me down. So I'm being told it's all good. So I was saying that as an agency being in between interpreters and clients, it can be a very difficult matter. Especially, for instance, they need to understand some aspects about interpretation. So we need to try and educate them. And only, for instance, when it comes to the choice of language, when the client is just ordering Spanish, for instance, then we need to ask which kind of Spanish. As we all know, as interpreters, there are different kinds of Spanish in the world. There is not something like Spanish, because the audience will not like it if the wrong accent is being used by the interpreter. But it is extremely difficult to get this information from a client, because the client or the organizer at the client really very often, or mostly even, doesn't know it herself or himself. So that is, of course, then a very nasty surprise for the interpreters when they are in the room and they are in the mind or in the ears of the audience, apparently using the wrong kind of Spanish. So we try to educate them. We have put in place some procedures for that, even in our contracts. But of course, what we can't do is put a gun to the head of the customer and make him or her fill out the briefing documents. We call back, we have online meetings with them. So we really try to do our best to make sure that we get all the information, that the client is briefed about how to make the best out of working with interpreters. Mariana was mentioning the issue of documents, but very often we as an agency are being told two things. The documents are confidential, we cannot send them, we are bound by the rules of the stock exchange, is a very popular one, which we often hear, or very, very often they say, well, the problem is we would like to send the documents to you, but the presenter hasn't sent the documents himself. Is still working. See managers coming at the meeting, arriving at the meeting, still working in the room next door, finishing up their presentations. This is how last minute it can get. So it is a really difficult job of trying to discipline clients. And of course, we are also in this chain of dependency. We are pitching against other agencies to try and get clients and contracts. And then, of course, we cannot put too much pressure there, or the client will say, well, this agency is rather troublesome. Let's work with another one. They don't ask all those nasty questions, which, of course, is beating the purpose. But the problem is that how do you do that? How do you make the client understand that it's for his or her own good? And for us, it's as interpreters, and being an interpreter myself, this is really, really obvious. But for the client, it's really not. It's really very often, and more often than not, a battle. Then, of course, we try to organize a briefing with the client. We do that as an agency so that we can brief the interpreters. And we try to also, when possible, have an on-site briefing. And again, there are a number of problems appearing. Very often we are being told, no time to do that. Very often we are being told, oh, well, then such and such a speaker needs to fly in earlier, and that's not possible for budgetary reasons. So it is really also difficult to get to speak to the right people and to make sure that we can get a briefing with the interpreters and the speakers. In or at the best of our clients, because I'm painting a rather gloomy picture here, but there are clients where it works perfectly well, who really understand the importance of doing that. And we have even gotten so far as to train speakers and rewrite presentations in a different format so that the interpretation can be more smoothly. The training of speakers is about different aspects, really. It is about accents. It's about the speed of speaking. It's about body language. I would be interested to know and to hear from the other people who are following the webinar what their experience is. But in my experience, and the colleagues that very often talk to interpreters, that is, they tell me, well, when the speaker is really using body language with his hands and really into his speech, it's a lot easier to interpret that person than a person who is having no intonation, who is not moving at all. I mean, I have a lot of Asian friends, but and nothing against the Japanese, but Japanese speakers do not tend to show that type of emotion. We had a famous example, just to to give you a flavor of the problems we encounter sometimes in the field, where at a meeting there was a Japanese speaker and he was speaking with his back to the audience because he had to read his slides. He didn't bring his laptop, and he was standing at the edge of the stage, and so he was really speaking with his back to the audience. So how do you deal with that? Link that to the accent, link that to the fact that the English was not very good, and you get a really impossible situation almost. That is being said, there are other things that are really, really important and always a matter of discussion. For instance, the client will try to minimize travel and logistics for the interpreters. The interpreter would like to have certain things as well. Of course, in this digital world and using VoiceBoxer, we can easily solve this because there are no more travel problems and logistic problems. But in the live space, we really have a lot of discussions there. Also, we try, as a matter of policy, to be fair to the interpreters, to make sure that when they work for a client, that they can work for that client on a long-term basis. But the client very often disrupts that, because when the budget is too expensive, the client will tell us, oh, just book local interpreters and that will be it. So that is something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. We have about, on a yearly basis, 3,000 to 3,500 meetings that we are processing. So we are dealing with a very, very wide population of interpreters. And yeah, well, interpreters are human beings. Some people are very easy to deal with, others are not so easy to deal with. It really depends also on the type of relationship we have. But on the whole, our job is really to be the middleman, and we consider ourselves to be an agency for both sides. So we try to make sure the client is happy, and we try to make sure the interpreter is happy. And Mariana said it so beautifully, all the things that she mentioned. Well, that is something that we continuously try to educate clients for. We have recently also worked on some white papers to send to clients, which explains to them how to work with interpretation, and not only with interpretation, but also with the technical equipment. We have made short lists of speaking tips for presenters, and so forth and so on. So all those things tend to help step by step. And maybe it is nice to talk a little bit of an anecdote that I personally have lived, and that I kind of have used myself. And for the interpreters amongst you, and also my colleagues here, the speakers and presenters, it might be very controversial, but here it is. It's a real life situation. Mariana mentioned the aspect of when jokes are being told and when the jokes are really difficult to translate or impossible to translate. So what do you do as an interpreter when all of a sudden somebody cracks a joke and you can't translate it? One of the clients actually told me, you know, Mr. van den Steene, it is a matter of psychology. So tell your interpreters that if the speakers are cracking jokes and they can't translate them, don't actually say that they can't translate them or explain what's in the joke, but tell another joke, because the audience wants to laugh. If my French people see that the English people are laughing, and my Italians and my Spanish, and they cannot laugh, they will say that the interpreters are very bad because they want to laugh. It's a matter of human psychology, that as a human being, when you see somebody else laughing in the room, you feel really cheated when you yourself sit there and you didn't hear anything funny. So the point is that I've been using that a lot myself, actually, and it works. Now I know that some people will say that it's not very professional. As an interpreter, we're not supposed to make something up, because actually that's what it is. Let's be fair. But the experience has showed me that when you don't do that, then actually the clients or the audience members come and step up to you and say, did you miss something? What was wrong there? And so you lose their trust. And if you have a 2-day meeting or a 3-day meeting, then you can feel that the audience has really lost faith in you. So I think that this is very funny. And well, I used it and reused it, and it really works. When you don't know what to do, crack a joke, make them laugh. The other thing that I think was maybe not mentioned, we heard Mariana talk about the use of the microphone, and Alexander has also said that. But when we have meetings which happen in U-shape, for instance, where the people are speaking in turn, especially every interpreter's favorite, when everybody is introducing themselves, then you have really an orchestra of funny accents, one after the other, switching languages, switching speakers. This is a nightmare of every interpreter, I believe. The use of the microphone and microphone discipline is very important. That means that we ask people to mentally count to 3 or even to 5 before taking the microphone in turn to speak. Wait, in other words, 3 to 5 seconds after the previous speaker on their right or on their left has finished speaking, because otherwise you get the funny effect that after 3 or 4 speakers, nobody knows who is speaking anymore, and you have sometimes the fact that an interpreter is interpreting still the previous or 2 speakers before, and so you get those funny confusions where, especially we work a lot in the trade union world and trade union negotiations. You get this funny situation where people are starting to fight or bicker with one another about nothing at all, basically, because the person didn't say that. The interpretation was just logically a little bit behind because the microphone switch was much too quick. So we had actually a meeting like that about an agreement that was being negotiated that went on for a number of hours because they had completely misunderstood one another. The French delegation was convinced that the Germans had said something, whilst it was their own colleagues who were sitting next to the Germans who had said that. So it became a real cacophony until we understood as interpreters the problem is not that. The problem must come from somewhere else. And we stopped the meeting, we talked to the chairperson, and the problem was solved, and everybody had a great laugh. So just this 2 funny stories about the jokes and about the microphone discipline to illustrate the point how important it is that the client realizes, well, it's not only about paying for the interpreters, it's about getting the most of it. It's I always tell clients, because they understand it better with an image, it's like you would go to a 5-star restaurant and you would order the best of dishes, only then not to really use your knife and fork or to forget to eat it, for instance, and you pay for it. So that's how crazy this is. So for us as an agency, this is extremely, extremely important, and we love to work with both sides. And in many clients where it works beautifully, I think that's what we're doing it for as an agency, because there you see the interpreters are happy, the clients are happy, and as Mariana beautifully said, the harmony, the quality of the event is guaranteed, the audience is happy, the message has gone through perfectly well, and that's good for us, that's good for the interpreters, and that's of course very good for the clients. So that was it from my side. Over to Alex.
Thank you so much, Peter. I can just say that all the other presenters and also the VoiceBoxer team really enjoyed listening to that, as well as we did enjoy listening to Mariana. So very, very interesting, and also interesting for me as somebody who works in an institution, in an international organization, to see that problems like budget cuts, staff reduction are also present on the private market. And that it's always difficult to get out the word about interpreting, to raise awareness on what our value is. And what was particularly eye-opening for me, who has not worked an awful lot on the private market with agencies, is to see that an agency is not just a middleman or something that gets in the way, but quite the opposite. Is actually someone basically who can add value. And I hope that that's something you can take away from what Peter said as well. So the point is not, as an agency or as maybe a consulting interpreter who puts together a big team, is not to be annoying or to get on the client's nerves with all those requests. It's really because we know what's necessary for interpreters to make a good job. We know what's necessary for a multilingual event to be successful. And we're really just trying to help, although it may not always seem that way, but that's really why we're doing it. So we're trying to get that preparation material. We're trying to make sure that technology is there and that we have the right equipment that is needed. So it's really not about us trying to be annoying. It's really about trying to make it work. That's the point. I will give the floor to Sergio Yorian before I do my final remarks and before we can then get to the Q&A. Sergio?
Sorry, I have actually a question interspersed here in the middle, triggered by what Peter was saying. I had a quick question. I was thinking about the fear of public speaking as a presenter, and also the fact that we're here talking on VoiceBoxer platform, so I can see myself. I can see how expressive I'm being, and it gives me a reminder of exactly what the interpreter is seeing as well. And I guess for me, it's interesting because of course it can make me a little more self-conscious. I'm very focused on what I might look like, but it also serves as an active reminder that I'm giving an interpreter not only language but meaning in my visual cues, in my gestures, in my facial expressions. And I think that's really interesting. We were just discussing how much. I think for presenters, for those of us who do have to often give the speeches that get interpreted, this fear of public speaking is a real consideration. But I'd love to get your sense. For interpreters, we were just talking about how funny interpreters are expected to be and how much personality they are very universally expected to convey. And therefore, fear of public speaking must not be a huge concern within the interpreter community. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not quite sure if that's always correct, to say the least. I'll hand over to Peter in just a second. But I know quite a few interpreters actually who are very comfortable sitting in their simultaneous booth behind the glass wall, and they can be extremely expressive. But if they had to leave their booth and if they had to go out and maybe do a consecutive interpretation of a dinner speech or something like that, they would be terribly afraid. So there is also this aspect of being in this safe space, which is created by the booth, I would say. But over to Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I was actually gonna answer the same thing. Myself being also very often a speaker at conferences, I realize that it's not the same thing. You are sitting in your booth and the booth creates like not only a physical barrier, but a psychological barrier between you and the audience. You're really like cut off in your safe space. But the other thing is that as interpreters, we are very often also sitting at the back of the room, and the audience very often has their backs to us. So we are there again feeling very, very safe because we very often are not in the line of fire. But as a speaker, you have all the eyes on you, and that's quite a different story. Now, being an interpreter and a speaker myself, I have to say that I really sympathize how difficult it is for speakers, especially for inexperienced ones who are not interpreters, to take into account the interpreters. And very often I have to become red with shame because I realize I've forgotten about the fact that there is interpretation in the back, and we have provided the interpreters ourselves at a conference where I am the speaker. So this is an extremely difficult situation to continuously be aware that you are being interpreted. And when it comes to VoiceBoxer, well, Sergio, indeed, I would like to say that maybe VoiceBoxer is narcissism reinvented, because when you speak, you can see yourself all the time. You're actually speaking to yourself, as I'm doing right now. And I've always found that a very interesting experience, because that's something that is very, very unique. So yes, it could, yeah, maybe as a philosopher, it could make you self-aware, it could make you self-analyze, it could make you realize who you are from a them perspective instead of only seeing yourself from a first person perspective. So yeah, maybe VoiceBoxer as kind of a therapy might be an option, Sergio. Over to Alexander or Mariana, I believe.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that what Alexander said is true. I mean, when we are in the safety of our little booth, we don't have any problems with what we're saying. We gesticulate to give, energy to what we're saying, to sort of imitate the speaker's style. But it's a different, let's say, it's a different dynamics when we have to stand up and be next to the speaker. I've been in this situation many times, and besides the fact that it's very intimidating, there's also the fact that if you are the interpreter, you are not supposed to be the focus of attention. Like I mentioned, the ideal is for the audience and the presenter to sort of forget that you're there. You're just there because you want to help them communicate to each other, but they're not there to see you. So when I have been on the spot, let's say, in standing in front of a large audience doing consecutive interpretation, I try to keep I don't gesticulate. I just stand as straight as possible, and I just say what I need to say. But of course, I'm terrified all the time. but it's not really public speaking, because I'm very aware that people are not there for me. And I think that's important. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to Peter and Mariana for sharing that. For the participants in the webinar, I would already like to encourage you, should you have any questions, any comments or remarks, to enter them into the chat channel for questions, so we can get to them during the Q&A session. I'll do a quick wrap up now, trying to sort of sum up the points that we've tried to bring across during the webinar, and then we can get to the Q&A part. And I think we'll certainly have a few interesting points to talk about. So just to wrap it up, I've just made a few points here in this final slide, the first being awareness, and then the second, trust, which are closely interrelated. So first of all, having the awareness and also creating the awareness, I guess, within your team and also for the participants in your event, that there is a multilingual event going on. So awareness for the fact that the event will be interpreted. It will not be English only. It will maybe be English and Spanish, or maybe there will be even more languages. So just to have that awareness and to also encourage people to make the most of that. That I think for me is an important factor, and to make clear that having interpretation, having multilingualism in general is not a necessity or something, well, I guess we have to do it. No, it can actually be, if it's done properly, a factor for the success of your event. Just like good speakers are an important and crucial factor, or good preparation, and yeah, even coffee and cookies are a very important factor. So just keep that in mind when you prepare it, and also when you raise awareness for your event in general, and when you do marketing, I guess. And then the next point being trust. So really try to build up a trusted relation with your interpreter, because they are your ally. As I said in the beginning, they are trying to make your multilingual event successful. They are there to help you. Then the next point, preparation. I think we've sort of beaten on this point so often during this webinar that it must have become clear that preparation is key. That interpreters need preparation material, not just the agenda or the things you're going to be talking about, but all the material that you have available can be potentially useful for us, and we usually like to get that in advance, so we have some time to prepare and to go through that again to make our job better. And the next point then sort of flows from the awareness for multilingualism is that if you have interpretation, you want to make sure that people actually use their mother tongue, that they can use the language that they're most comfortable with, so they can really focus on content, presentation, and delivery, and leave sort of the cross-language component to us as interpreters, because that's what we're good at, that's our job. So if possible, use your mother tongue, your first language, whatever you want to call it. And then the other points, I think, are just common sense and things that are important for good public speaking. So enunciate clearly, especially the things that are important names, figures, other things. You want to make sure that you get that across very clearly, not only for the benefit of the interpreters, but also for the benefit of the participants that listen to you directly. If it's important, you want to make extra sure that it comes across very well. So just speak naturally, as good as possible. Don't speak too quickly. Again, that's not just for the interpreters, that's for everyone. If you're just rambling along at lightning speed, nobody will get anything out of what you have to say, and that will be a shame. So calm down, take a deep breath. I know that's easy to say, but that's what the public speaking coaches say as well. Take a deep breath, focus on what you want to say, and then say it, and then it should be fine. Mariana mentioned as well that we don't like when people read texts out. Again, I think any normal participant wouldn't like that either, because it's only natural. If you have a text in front of you, you're reading that out, you have a tendency of becoming quicker and quicker, and it's not really very useful. But if you can't avoid it, if you have to read out something, try to make a point of reading it out slowly. Give the text to the interpreters in advance, ideally, so we can prepare it, so we see what's coming, and that will help us do our job better. And of course, try to work well with the microphone. Don't be too close, because then people will hear all the popping and breathing noises. Don't be too far away, because then it's too silent and people can't hear properly. Interpreters can't hear properly and can't interpret that correctly. Just one tip: if you're in a bigger room, it's also useful to take off the headphones and maybe put them under the table when you turn on the microphone, because then that can avoid these beeping sounds, these interferences that can happen with an interpretation system. And of course, all these things also apply to any online or remote event you have, like on VoiceBoxer, for example. So there, the same things apply, because, I mean, for technical reasons, there may be issues. So you want to make extra sure that you're not going too quickly, that you're enunciating clearly for all the participants and for the interpreters. You want to make sure that you count up to 3 or 5, I think that's what Peter said, between turning on the microphone and then starting with what you want to say, so nothing gets lost. And of course, make sure you turn on the microphone, you don't forget it, because otherwise that will get lost as well. So those are a few points that I wanted to cover during or towards the end of this webinar. And maybe just a final slide here to drive it home. So I like to say that good public speaking is not something that you do just for the interpreters. It's not a bone you throw the interpreters. It's what makes communication happen. And I think that's really, one of the main points of today's webinar is to make that clear, that interpreters are your ally. We don't want you to do all those things just to do us a favor, because we know you pay us as well. That's clear. No, we want to make sure your multilingual event is a success. That's really what we're there for. And with that, I believe there are first questions coming in. And I think one of the first was from Sergio. And I will probably just hand over to him. Sergio.
Thank you very much, all three of you, Alex, Mariana, Peter. It's really fascinating. From a presenter side, following Alex on those reminders of what to do, I also want to harken back to the point made earlier. As someone who speaks and is often interpreted, these reminders are not a burden. It really does go back to what was said earlier, that interpreters are your ally. And I have found that, as Mariana said, they go with the flow. These are great reminders to ensure the interpretation is the best it can be. However, interpreters are such skilled professionals that wherever you take it, wherever your personal style or limitations or fears take you, your interpreters are still your allies that are there to support you. It's something that I've experienced time and again, and I find to be a great comfort knowing that I can focus on my speaking with these reminders in mind without being too worried. But I had a question, I guess, a question for Mariana. In addition to the reminders that Alex put forward, are there other special considerations in an online environment that you would want to give to a speaker? Something that you've experienced that is either that is different, or that a presenter or a speaker who is being interpreted online in a context such as VoiceBoxer should keep in mind? Because I figure this is something that would be really relevant to our partners and our clients that are listening to this. Well,
to be honest, I think I said what I said at the beginning was oriented as much to real-life events as to online events. And mostly, I would say that it's easier for people to forget they are being interpreted if they are not in the room with the interpreter. So, like Alexander said, awareness is very important. We are there for you. So, to be aware that there's someone there, out there, in the digital world, completely devoted to you and following your every word. So I think this is useful to be aware, to maybe have some reminder in front of you so that you can really remember there is somebody interpreting for me at this moment. And maybe I shouldn't speak so fast, because, and we've said this often enough today, but it's true that if you go fast, it's not just the interpreter who is affected, but actually the other listeners as well. And like I said, the very important thing about the microphones, because we cannot hear people if the sound of our voice is louder. So since they are in a room, they don't have access to a microphone, they're asking a question, we don't really hear very well what they're saying. And even if we try to interpret for them, then our voice covers everything. So it's very important then for presenters to kindly repeat the question. That helps a lot. And besides that, well, the preparation is the same. You need to be prepared. If it's a longer event, then please send us the material even with more advance, because of course there will be more contents. And if it's a short event, it's still important. I mean, even if you only speak 15 minutes, we need to know what's going to be said, so that we can be there for you to the best of our capacities. This is what we want to do, always. And we can, we definitely can. And it just needs to be teamwork. That's all.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mariana. I can see that we're getting over the hour we have designated for this, so I guess I'll keep this to my last question, and I'll make it a playful one. A challenge to the three distinguished interpreters that we have on the panel. Now that you have been interpreted, we have our interpreter, Janeth, who's been kindly interpreting us into Spanish. I would love to know, and I will follow up with the question, but I would love to know from the panel how you feel you've done as a speaker following your own guidelines.
Well, I know I sent my talking points. I actually had prepared. I prepare very much when I'm going to say something. I like to prepare in writing. So I think I sent what I was going to talk about. Of course, some things changes because I was not reading, but I think at least the preparation was there, if not 48 hours in advance, maybe just 24. And I hope that the tone of voice was natural and the speed was also natural enough so that Jeanette didn't have so much trouble following me. This I hope.
I hope I did all right. I cannot really say so for myself. I can say for the two others, I believe that that was really, really, really good. But of course, us men, we can on top of that not match the beautiful smile of Mariana. So that's a lost battle before it even began, Sergio.
Thank you both very much. The last thing I just want to say, a quick comment to thank you, Peter from Presence Group, you, Mariana, and you, Alex, for moderating this. You've all been great sports. It's been super informative for me, and I'm sure I speak for the rest of the panel. So thank you all so much for taking part in this today, and for all of the tips. I'm sure we'll keep that in mind when we present and are interpreted in the future. Alex, I send it back to you to wrap things up.
Yes, thank you, Sergio. Thank you for those kind words. I usually have the tendency of being too fast when I speak, so that's a problem I'll keep working on. Before I finish the event, I just wanted to point all the participants to 3 interesting videos that are available. They're all available on YouTube, I believe. And they give a very good insight, again, into what it is that interpreters do, why they do it, how they do it, and so on. So, for example, there's this interesting video here with the alien animation that was conceived by Evandro Magalhães, who is a very high-ranking interpreter at the International Telecommunications Union. So he did this video together with the people from TED-Ed, how interpreters juggle 2 languages at once. So you can check that out, and I believe the VoiceBoxer team is also copying the links into the chat, so you can click on them directly. Then this gentleman here leaning on the table, that's a colleague of mine, Jose Ituri. He regularly gives presentations for the European institutions on how to speak in public when you are being interpreted. So that's pretty much what we are talking about today. And the whole seminar is not available, but you can get a quick taste of what he does in this video. And the last one I wanted to point you is on the website of what can be called an interpreting agency or a cooperative of interpreters called Calliope. And they have a very well-animated, very funny video about smart speaking at international events, international meetings with interpretation. So that's basically a few minutes of capturing everything that we've talked about during this, well, more or less 1 hour of the webinar. So that's what I wanted to share to wrap things up. Thank you once again to Mariana. Thank you to Peter. And thank you to Sergio and Ivan from VoiceBoxer for your support. Thank you for tuning in to this webinar. And you can find all the contact information for the 3 of us and for VoiceBoxer as well. And we'll be happy to talk to you maybe another day. So bye-bye.